Hi, my name is Autumn Parr, and I'm the Vice President of HOSA, and this is Jessie Fisher from Ohio Health.
My name is Jessie Fisher, and I'm an RN, like she said, at Ohio Health Mansfield, and I've been a nurse there for 14 years.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So I have a few questions for you. What do you see as the biggest problem with drug use?
I think actually there are two big problems with drug use. The first is the stigma associated with it. So, what has always been thought of as people that use drugs are people that are poor, dirty, indigent, that live in the inner city, when really drugs do not discriminate at all. So you can be affected by drugs, whether it's a sibling, a child, or you yourself. You can be Caucasian, African American, male, female, rich, poor, it doesn't matter, it can affect everyone. I think the other big problem is how we perceive drug abuse now. And it's the scare tactic that we use that I think is wrong. So the scare tactic we use is, if you use drugs, you may die. So this is the end result. This is the only bad result. When actually I think it's sort of the opposite. I think the worst outcome, and I think the scare tactic we should use, is that when you use drugs and you live through that, that's actually worse. Because every single day you will wake up with the ramifications of that one choice that you made to use drugs. It's going to change your life forever. So you may have loss of finances, loss of relationships, lose your home, lose your car, and every day you wake up, you're going to have to try to fight the urges and the symptoms of withdrawal, and those are some pretty big hills to have to climb back over just to get to where you started. So the best choice is to just not use drugs at all.
Okay, that's good advice. Do you think kids or teens are more likely to start using drugs, alcohol, or tobacco if their parents used them?
More likely to use them, yes. I don't think that's the only reason that they would. I think there's a lot of other different sort of influences on the outside of the home, which could be a lot of things. It could be other family members, friends, people at school. I think the opposite could be said too, though. If you have parents that have never used drugs before, you could still wind up with a child that uses drugs. So from personal experience, I can say my parents never used drugs that my brother and I were aware of. They were never in the home, never saw them ever. And I'm 34 years old. I've never touched a drug in my life. And by the age of 16, my brother was very heavily addicted to drugs. So grew up in the same household, the same parents, raised the same way, and wound up going down two totally different paths.
So it's either way.
Yep.
How do you think teens get started on abusing drugs, alcohol, and tobacco?
I would say peer pressure is probably the number one reason why kids or adults go down that path. I think we have this deep-seated idea that we as humans have to fit in and feel wanted and needed and fit and conform into this surrounding that we're in, whether it's your group of friends or if you're an adult, it could be people that you work with. But I think we're really influenced by the things on the outside of our body, not on the inside. So I think it's all those factors that play into making us want to use drugs to fit in.
Okay. Sorry. Do you believe in peer pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. Peer pressure is a real thing for teens and for adults. But what separates the two is, as a teenager, your brain is not fully developed. The difference between a teenage brain and an adult brain is that the area where you have the development of the idea of making right decisions, making the right judgment, that's not fully developed. So while there are still adults that choose to go down the drug path and the wrong path, they have that part of the brain that works where they have judgment and they have the idea of what happens as a result of drug use, whereas the teenagers may not. They just think of the here and the now and what feels good and what makes you happy right now, and they can't think of the ramifications of that choice.
Okay, so you said that it affects teens in like a different way. So teens kind of don't know what they're doing in a way?
I think if that initial here and now moment, they know this is what my friends are doing. They see that it feels good or they're happy in that moment, but they just don't have that ability to see the future and how that's going to affect their life. And that's not just with drugs, it's with every decision that they make as a teenager. And that's what separates a teen from an adult. And that's why it's so important that we have adults in our life that teach us to go down these right paths.
Do you believe marijuana is a gateway drug to the use of others?
Yeah, I think marijuana can be a gateway drug for sure. I think even worse than marijuana, though, is prescription drugs. I think for a while we've made it really easy to get our hands on prescription drugs, like the Percocets and the Vicodins. And I think that has made this path a little easier to go down because a doctor actually prescribes them to you in most cases. So you don't feel like you're doing something wrong. So it's almost like you've started doing something right that the physician has instructed you to do, but then it sort of leads you down, this road of using drugs. So it's not just marijuana. I think the only thing associated with marijuana is if you had the personality type that you were willing to try marijuana, then you're willing to try things that you're unaware of the ramifications. So I think you have that personality where you were willing to try this and you didn't know what was going to happen, so you may be willing to try this drug as well.
Okay. And then one last question for you.
Okay.
What do you know about Red Ribbon Week?
So Red Ribbon Week actually goes all the way back to 1985, I think it is. It's not very publicly known. It should be more known than what it is actually. So way back in 1985, probably before you were even born, I'm sure, there was a DEA agent, and he was from California, working in Mexico actually, and he was undercover. I think it was about for 4 years or so, and he was very, very close to busting this multi-billion-dollar drug pipeline. And somehow, unfortunately, one way or another, his true identity was discovered, and they kidnapped him, tortured him, beat him, and actually killed him.
Oh my gosh.
So his family here in the United States, in California, they wore red ribbons in his memory. So over all these years, it's just sort of evolved from the idea of just mourning the loss of him to kind of encompassing everyone that's affected by tobacco, alcohol, and any sort of drug. So it's a bigger deal than what I think a lot of people know. So it's a whole week in October, and people wear red ribbons just to kind of mourn the loss or mourn the effects that drugs have had on people.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.